certain rules can determine slavery. However, your friend was probably just less slavery in the 1800s. Obviously, no one would reasonably reject slavery except for the black people who were considered ignorant at this time. Probably means that your friend was probably got this performing contract nowadays because you know, by the time you're going, so definitely read independent version job because your friend was probably that. So, in first, you knew about the argument going around, you knew that it was bad, you still read it anyway, so you just said you trust that you could claim the answer just fine. So, definitely turns the opposite. So, also, that turns out. So, or how you should value around. If you think AC pairing fails, go negative on presumption, considering the theoretical arguments as to why negating is harder are conceded. Those also turn the trivialism argument, which is horribly misapplied. Also, if you think AC pairing is true, there's just too many terms. Remember, the terms don't have to be true. People have to believe them so they can reject the AC maxim. Go negative.
Okay, 56. Then, or actually, quickly on the trivialism stuff, then framework, contention, and then NC.
Trivialism, AC framework, AC contention, NC. Okay, cool.
Is everyone ready?
I'll concede that my trivialism argument was unwarranted. That means that they don't have any reason to go neck off that. Now they say that the individual people can reasonably reject, and that's how it's based off. No, they can see the argument at the bottom of the AC that I extended the Scanlon 98 evidence that is how we justify rules is based off of general principles that we is based on general principles that we apply. Just focusing on contingent interests of different people is not sufficient to negate under my framework. They did not answer this argument at all. It was conceded throughout the round. Means you should definitely default to this analysis because the contingent interests are not something that you could base on reasonable rejected or any sort of principles offered, which it takes out their argument in the absence of any good two-in-our explanation of how this argument functions. That you should not vote off it. They say all of their arguments are just about what people would subjectively want, but I prove that can't ground morality since that would not be a binding thing. That is something that they've said throughout all of their speeches. It proves that something that would actually help or hurt them, which I will win if I win by app contention. That also means that you shouldn't vote off presumption, even if there's a risk of offense that you should affirm. Even if there's risk of offense that you should affirm. Now to the contention. They really messed up here. They don't have any offense. They extend the recall 14 evidence that all of these plea bargains already happen underground. There's virtually no oversight on them, and they also force defendants to doing that. That proves that the defendants could reasonably reject it. So there is definitely a reason for us not to have plea bargaining, which takes all of the arguments. They concede a few impacts on this. They concede that this takes out their first argument about how there's implicit bargaining because there's already implicit bargaining in this quote. Now they also concede that I'm also going for the Alschuler evidence. They conceded that the reason why there is so much problem in juries right now is because there are so many cases. Plea bargains make cases so prolonged and hard because there are so many charges that people have to get through, which is the exact reason why people can't go home quickly, etc., which controls the internal link to all their cases of evidence. I'll go through the impacts of that right now. Their second bulletin evidence says that there will be way more trials, but no, I prove that there won't be more trials because if people they can see that it would cause prosecutors to have to dismiss weak cases, so they would not bring as many cases to trial, and also even if there are more trials, they would be much quicker, which would solve all their impacts. That was conceded. They say that it causes an inequality of allocation, but no, I agree that there would be the resource. They wouldn't require as many resources per trial, which proves that the allocation would still be fine. All these were conceded responses. You should definitely vote on it. Now the last Wilkinson evidence, they concede that it's not done in the shadow of the trial, and it's not done in the shadow of the trial, so it's done underground. And if people would not be able to, people would be able to return home sooner because the trials wouldn't be as long in the first place. Now in the NC. they concede that all my evidence also turns all their arguments. For example, the Bergman evidence. They say that people would have to go home sooner, but they've already conceded their trials would take less time anyway, so people would be able to go home sooner. Now their JGL evidence extend that this is just a subjective opinion, not something that we could use back. So I'll also extend the full data because they would justify things like slavery. They say the black people weren't seen as slaves. No, I don't justify slavery because black people should not be seen as objects, and rather reasonable rejection would mean that slavery would be bad because they could be rejected. Look, do not vote off of the presumption. I'm obviously winning offense back to both right now.
What's up?
There needs to be a chaperone that stays not like in the same room, but like at the yeah. So, if you're still indisposed, then I guess that means that you can stay at the hotel as long as they're able. Well, if they kick us out of the room, there's literally nothing we can do about that. We would just have to like be as close to her as possible. Okay. After I judge this round, I'll check back in.
Okay, goodbye.
We did it.
Going first.
Congratulations to both debaters for making it to the double octafinals of the 44th Annual Harvard Invitational. The decision is a 2-1 for the affirmative from Cambridge Rangers. It was me. I get to go first. So, top level of the debate is this perf-con argument. I never understood why the framework justified slavery. It made no sense to me at all. So, I can't vote on that even though it's obviously the highest layer. So, then I have two things that I have to think about. I have to think about this presumption stuff, the AC framework, and then I have to think about the AC contention. So, the 2AR says that that you can cross apply his argument that trivialism doesn't make any sense, which means it's not a reason to negate. Sure. Problem though, he says that if your framework is false or inoperable, then I vote neg on presumption anyway, because there's nothing that I'm supposed to do with the framework. To that you say, I'll just get a risk of offense or something. Like there's some risk that my framework is true or something. I don't want to give this argument too much credit because it was like 3 seconds. So I think given that he's telling me what I'm supposed to do, if I don't think that your framework is true, I think that I'm supposed to think that like his arguments are reasonably terminal. And I think the tiebreaker for me on this is that in the 2AR does not contain a warrant or a reference to a warrant for your framework. I have no clue I'm supposed to think your framework is true. I have every reason to think that I cannot evaluate any offense under your framework, because people could just reject every single principle, so it wouldn't be operable. Like, principles for reasonable rejection don't do anything. Like, there are three of these arguments, and I personally paradigmatically don't think you can just blow them off by just being like, risk of offense. I'm not going to answer any of these 4 arguments why my framework, there's no offense under it, or there's no possible set of offense. So ultimately, I vote negative on presumption because there's no true framework in the debate, one framework with even a semblance of warrant that there could be offense related to. And AC contention, I also think that there's that I could probably vote negative here, although I think this is obviously a lot more close. So obviously the second and third turn don't matter because the AF makes trials more efficient and whatever. And obviously the first argument doesn't matter either because plea bargaining is underground now, which constitutes a reasonable rejection. However, I think this makes things a little bit complicated because if your argument is that plea bargaining is reasonably rejectable because it going underground is reasonably rejectable, or it would be bad if it was underground, I don't see how that doesn't non-unique your argument too. Or at least I don't see like a unique reason to vote AF, which doesn't mean I vote on presumption or whatever. I'm just like, I don't think that it's offense for you. And I also don't think it actually answers his 4th turn. I don't think that either the Alsher card or the like plea bargaining inevitably underground stuff really does in a way that doesn't also non-unique all of your arguments, especially given the like light 2AR stuff. I think that the negative does have offense off of this last turn. I don't think that your like I improve the efficiency of the court system is responsive to his argument that like some people might just like quicker trials because of like lack of criminal records and stuff like that. I don't know why the like underground plea bargaining stuff non-uniques it. I also don't know why trials being more efficient. Like I understand why that answers his other arguments. Don't know why it would answer this one, which would mean at least. And my understanding of the way that I'm supposed to think about the framework in this round, I know you like could have done a little bit more of a true testy thing, and I don't think you did that where it's like, if I prove plea bargaining is reasonable rejectable, it doesn't matter whether the abolition of plea bargaining is reasonably rejectable. You didn't say that, so the way that I'm supposed to think about offense in this round based on both debaters is, I'm supposed to think like, is the abolition of plea bargaining reasonably rejectable? Like that would constitute a turn, and I think that would be. People would have possible objections to them. So there was this argument that I'm not supposed to look at contingent circumstances, and that it was applied to like a wide variety of arguments, including maybe this one, although not explicitly. I don't think that this takes out your argument if I also think I'm supposed to allow your argument, because your arguments are like, here are some people who would think that it's like who could reasonably reject it, right? And his is like, here are some people who also like have a reason to reasonably reject it. It's also not really based. If like you didn't apply it here, but like if this interest is contingent, so is all of your arguments, and then like what am I supposed to do? Hashtag presumption or something. But I also think that like so I don't know if this had been the only argument in the debate if I would have voted on, but he did make this really stupid argument that was like also new argument that like I don't need to win that any of my arguments are true. Because I just have if people have introduced these things into the curriculum, then they, the authors, have a reason to reject it, right? And so clearly, if I just like stared at this argument for long enough, like it's obviously one of those contingent things. But given that I don't understand why, like, what the difference is in terms of contingency between yours arguments and anything else, I probably would have voted if this was the only argument. But I certainly think it's a tiebreaker given the fact that I think that he's ahead on the turn, and I don't understand why your underground stuff is really offense either way. So I think I could vote negative in either case. I can't vote negative off of the NC because of the two arguments, just like polls are contingent. I understood that argument for sure, and I understood the answer to the first argument being solved by the trials getting more efficient, or at the very least, the 2NR explanation of the thing was something like judges don't want to have to do more cases, and obviously getting more efficient solves that. That was my understanding of that interaction. But I think that the F framework's not a thing, so I can vote negative on presumption, and I also think that the negative is probably just winning offense to the contention. One possible way that I could see voting affirmative is that there's at least some of the rhetoric in the 2NR makes me think that the 2NR thinks that I should vote on like the substance of the contention over the framework stuff anyway, if there's at all a risk of that, but I really wasn't sure whether that was actually the argument he made. So it at least was very clear that I'm supposed to look at presumption in that case, or that was at least one of the things he wanted me to do, and so it would feel weird not doing it given that you don't talk about that at all.
A really quick question. The offense in the F is supposed to meet that Scanlon-Wang kind of argument in the contention because there's something like intrinsically coercive about plea bargaining, like you were threatening someone and then trying to make a deal with them. If that if we had used more rhetoric like intrinsically coercive or like something about the concept.
The thing was like as of the 1AR, it just became about like kind of like actual circumstances, right? It was like I solved the court clog, and so it moved away from the intrinsicness part. But definitely, if it was intrinsic, then probably only this last term matters at all. Yeah.
Okay.
I would understand that.
So do you think I guess what I was kind of intending in the 1AR was to like concede his framework. Should I have like explicitly said like I'll concede your framework, and like all the AC offense turns it and like outweighs because of various Scanlon things?
Do you want my opinion on what you should have done?
Sure.
Trivialism is true. Vote out. Just he did like so like man. I'm a contingent standard guy. This is my thing. But I have to say one of the things about contingent standards is that people rarely actually trigger them, because normally it's like they make some side argument against your framework that doesn't actually trigger it. He literally did trigger it, right? He's like, you can't you can't resolve any of the disagreements. Like that was like his argument. Just be like, I can't resolve the disagreements. Our frameworks are like functionally identical because they are, and then just be like, no one can resolve the disagreement. You can see it that this means vote act, and then maybe the 2AR is like, I'm gonna make a bunch of new arguments. Like honestly, the 2AR in this round should also have been trivialism. But I think that if you
don't listen to him.
if you norms, if you didn't want to do that, I think that I thought that the 1AR was honestly completely fine. Like I think that like the 2NR makes a lot of kind of newish moves. The 1N doesn't have like that many reasonable sources of offense. I would have loved to see a greater explanation of why all of these arguments are contingent and intrinsic stuff, as Bob said.
Also, how do you answer the argument that like if everything is true, then that also means you would vote neg?
That just means it being true that you should vote neg is not the relevant question. The relevant question is the resolutional statement true? Even if there was some other statement that was the opposite of the resolution, that would also be true, right? This is classic Florida stuff right here.
This is a little
if if you have any questions, send me an email. I've judged many. But isn't the neg also true trivialism things? Voted AF #Florida.
Okay, so that was a long repeat. So I think that one of there are two easy fixes to some of the problems around. First one is that I think you need a much better answer to Abhi's question about what does it mean to reasonably reject stuff? My recommendation would be to use, I think it's called agent relative reasonable rejection. I think this also uses the same card that you're extending the 1AR to 2AR, so it's not a big jump to sort of changing the AF to make it easier to answer that question. But anyway, so how I evaluate the round is there's the Scanlon 98 evidence that's extending 1AR and 2AR, and I think that does a pretty good job of sort of saying, I can get the implication as we have to treat things as intrinsically coercive or anything like that, but rather things in the context of some general principle, right? And that's the way in which you reasonably reject stuff. And the application of this is also a little bit unclear, but it seems like the way the offense works around is sort of applied in a very consequential fashion, right? Like in the general principle of plea bargaining, do things like coercion end up happening? Yes or no? If yes, then vote F. If no, then vote neg, right? And this sort of takes out your argument here that's well, any person can reasonably reject. If I have any reason why anyone could have a reason of rejecting it, then that's enough to negate, right? Because that has to be willed in the context of the general principle of plea bargaining, not particular circumstances that people face, right? So then this becomes a question of do you win the turns on case? I agree that, I think that in terms of the 2-and-R strategy, spending as much time as you did on trivialism and everything else makes you undercover the turns a lot and focusing on this argument. So I don't see a lot of the evidence comparison that's done by the 1AR and 2AR on why the evidence not only comes first, does a better job of explaining what will happen, but also there are conceded implications that, while I don't know how true they are or how great they are conceded as implications that take out your turns on the 1-4 point and definitely the 2 and 3 as well, right? So given that, I think that it's efficient to vote on AC offense because of the way that's framed. The second thing I'm going to say is, so I've judged in the past year something like 350 rounds. This is the first time I could ever say this, but I did not catch trivialism at all in this round until you mentioned the 2-and-R. In AC, I typed in the segment. I have no idea where trivialism came from. The 2-and-R, I'm starting on trivialism. It's wait, where is that? So I'm just gonna admit that maybe I'm bad at flowing now, but or maybe be clear about that.
I'm just primed. I'm ready for it always.
Yeah, I'm just and you were talking about trivialism. I just don't know where that was. So
we did not say the word trivialism in 1AR. I don't think we said this means.
Well, the 1AR said
true.
Well, the 1AR said it
argument without saying trivialism.
The one AC didn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, okay. You think? Okay, I see. That's probably the reason.
Okay. Yeah.
You didn't flag it.
Yeah.
About the general principle arguments with regards to the AC framework.
Yeah.
One of the MC framework arguments I made was that even if we evaluate consequences, anybody can just make up a consequences even onto a general principle as to why they can just reasonably reject an answer. Why does that not take out the AC framework?
Yeah. So the argument that he's making is that that's not true, right? There's the conceded implication off of the Scanlon evidence that explains the way in which, when we apply those principles, right, it's the principle that we evaluate the consequences of, right? The application of that in terms of how offense works seems to literally just be consequentialism straight. In terms of a question of framework, then yeah.
Also, you didn't extend that. Am I wrong?
Probably not.
Okay. So I evaluated the round very similarly. On the trivialism stuff, I didn't feel comfortable giving this to the neg for two reasons. One was that I don't get a clear implication of what to do with trivialism. You say vote on presumption, but you also say just reject the yard. So I wasn't quite sure what to do with that. Also because it was so there was barely a warrant up until the 2-and-R, and so I didn't feel comfortable both giving you the new and the 2 negating is harder implies presumption. Also, this means that you should presume neg. It just felt like I'd be doing a lot of work for you. So I don't vote on trivialism. Then on substance, I agree that the framework debate is really hard to evaluate because neither of you extends your framework into the rebuttal speeches. So I kind of view this as we'll just default to, both of you seem to agree that we should just adopt the general idea of the AC framework that we should adopt the maxim that people wouldn't reasonably reject. And under that, there's very little weighing because the neg goes for the argument that if I just prove that some people would reject it, then that means you should vote neg. But the AF definitely has some offense saying that some people. So you have offense saying that some people would reject the AF. The AF has offense saying that some people would reject the neg. I'm not quite sure what to do for that. The only offense that would be the tiebreaker there for me is the Scanlon 98 evidence saying that it would be sort of like a general principle for evaluating this kind of debate. And for me, the most general argument in the round is the Rakoff evidence in the AC, so that's where I vote.
Thanks, guys. Know what trivialism is, you know. I could even sometimes write the argument. I do not know why it affirms or negates or doesn't trigger presumption or other such things.
My favorite argument against trivialism is that I can see that modal logic is true, but I deny that possibilism is true. So if it's not true that every statement that's possible is also true, then every statement's an a priori. That the only way for something to be true is if it's a priori true, and if the answers are not a priori, then.
Well, that proves that sometimes your favorite arguments aren't always the best ones.